Jimmy's Table.
Hey everybody, you're listening to the Jimmy's Table podcast, jimmystable.com. I'm your host, Jimmy Humphrey, where I like to have conversations about faith, life, culture, and sometimes food. So earlier this week, I looked at the calendar after I published my last episode. I was like, oh man, it's Valentine's Day this week. And don't worry, I already have my Valentine's Day plans already, planned out for me and my wife. This Friday, we're going out to dinner somewhere. But I got to realizing, man, I published a podcast on a week that had nothing to do with Valentine's Day, and I've really missed a good opportunity. So I was talking to my wife about it, and Megan suggested, well, why don't you just publish kind of a midweek bonus episode? And I like that idea so much, I decided, why not? Why not go ahead and release 2 podcasts in 1 week out of my normal weekly rotation and call this my 3 Keys to a Better Marriage Valentine's Day podcast bonus episode. So here you go, folks.
Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today. Marriage, that blessed arrangement, that dream within a dream.
So the first key, I believe, above all things, when it comes to marriage, we need a change of perspective. We need a reorientation in our perspective on marriage. Because frankly, some of y'all act like marriage isn't really much different than simply having a roommate. You just happen to have somebody that you're planning on spending the rest of your life with and, doing some romantic things with, maybe having some kids, maybe sharing some finances. But at the end of the day, some of you will act like marriage is just a glorified roommate. Your spouse is not just a glorified roommate, folks. I think if we were to approach marriage from a biblical perspective, we'd realize that in marriage, we become one flesh, according to the Bible. So, let's act like it. While we have not lost our individuality in marriage, I am my own person, and so is my wife. In marriage, I have ultimately surrendered my life and my individuality to my wife, and vice versa. So out of that perspective, everything I ultimately do in my life should be done in consideration of my spouse. My marriage is a partnership, and I need to treat it like such. So when I make career choices, financial choices, what I should do in my spare time, what my involvement with ministry and church stuff should be, ultimately everything I do and everything I am in my life is subject to the scrutiny of my spouse. No, but seriously. Everything I do in my life is ultimately done out of consideration of how it impacts my wife. And if you're married, that's how you should approach your marriage too. You are one flesh, so act like it. Everything you do it together. Anything in your life that requires anything of significance, or even really anything minor and moderate, you should ultimately work at to making such decisions together and forming mutual consensus with one another. If you guys are doing your own thing, if you're a husband doing your own thing, if you're a wife doing your own thing, if you just gotta say, well, I just gotta have some me time, and you make that a pretty regular thing, well, work on your spouse about you and your me time. What does your spouse think about that? And, maybe you can have some me time in your relationship and do things on your own, of course. I'm not saying you can't be an individual, but at the end of the day, whatever you guys are doing, make sure you're on the same page with one another, individually, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, and all the other arenas in your life. And don't approach this as I gotta do this. The old ball and chain is, she's really been nagging on me. She's really been henpecking on me, in some sort of begrudging sort of manner. Rather, you should look at it as marriage as, man, I get the opportunity to do this, and rejoice in whatever it is you're trying to work out and do together. And on some days, this might be easier than other days. But I've found in the going on 7 years that my wife and I have been married. Not long. We've not been married long. Just long enough to give some basic advice. Maybe we can write a book. I don't know. But at least I can put a podcast together, right? But some days all this sort of stuff comes easier than others. But at the end of the day, we all need to be working from the perspective that we are one flesh, and that this marriage thing is a partnership, and there really is no room for just being yourself in marriage. You got to be yourself with each other, and ultimately get on the same page with all that you do.
Love, true love, will follow you forever.
Key number 2, be lifelong newlyweds. When I was in college, an old pastor friend of mine told me that whatever I did when I became married one day, no longer how I had been married, even 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years now, if I should live that long, he said, always, he said, date your wife. It's, easy in marriage to get on autopilot and simply coast along. The everyday comings and goings of life really make it easy to do such. Stress enters into the picture, jobs, kids, medical issues, financial issues, and other things will really interrupt the flow of your romantic life. And it's easy to let those things simply go by the wayside, he said. But whatever happens, my old friend told me, don't let these things get between you and your wife. You made a choice to get married to your spouse. And such simply wasn't merely a one-time decision. It is a lifelong, continuous decision. It's a decision you decide on every moment of every day. So, just as you intentionally got married, be intentional about being romantic with your spouse. Pursue them the rest of your days. And that'll never happen simply by accident. It's a choice you ultimately have to make every single day. So, one thing I think you should always do. I saw it happen every day growing up, as far as I can remember when I was a kid. And I always thought it'd be a great thing to incorporate into my marriage when I got married one day. But don't let a single day pass where you don't kiss your spouse. I make it a point every day to kiss my wife. I intentionally kiss her every day before we go to work, assuming she's up and not sleeping like on summer because she's a teacher. But I still come by her bed, even when she's still in bed in the summer. And I intentionally kiss my wife. And then I intentionally kiss her when I get home. And even on the weekends when I don't, have that morning and evening routine, at some point I make it a point to intentionally kiss my wife. Make it a point to do that in your life. Make it a point to deliberately go on dates. Now, I know everybody's schedule's different. You got a lot of competing interest. But at the end of the day, make it a point to go regularly on dates with your wife. And whatever that date looks like, it may not have to be like this formal romantic gesture of dinner and a movie every week or 2 weeks or once a month or whatever it ends up being. But going on a date can be simple as making it a point to simply run errands together. My wife, we call it our weekly date. Every week we intentionally go grocery shopping together. We like grocery shopping. I don't know about you. You may not like grocery shopping. You might look at grocery shopping as the worst errand in the world and you just want to get it done. But whatever it is, my point is, at the end of the day, make an intentional date with your wife and your spouse, and make it an intentional thing that you do on a regular basis. And, don't just make it errands. Do something special. Go out to dinner, go a movie, get time together just to talk, go on vacation deliberately together. At the end of the time, it's all about deliberately setting aside some special time just to be with one another. Because at the end of the day, it's not so much about your doing and what you're doing together, but it's simply about your being together and making it a point to be together. Because, if you don't make it a point to be together, well, your jobs, your kids, your medical issues, your finances, all those interruptions in life, they're going to make it a point to interrupt your life, to interrupt the romance, and to kill it. So whatever it is you do, whether it's, simply picking up flowers for your spouse on a regular basis, or making a special meal, or what have you. At the end of the day, just like it says in my profile, if you look on my profile and all my social media stuff, on Facebook, on Twitter, I proclaim that I'm a lifelong newlywed, and I try to make that a point in my life. Things may not be like they were in the first year of your marriage, when you guys were in your honeymoon phase, whatever, I'm not saying you guys have to be all freaky all the time. But at the end of the day, if you want to be freaky, go ahead, have at it. I encourage it. But at the end of the day, simply make it a deliberate point to be with one another in whatever way that ultimately ends up manifesting itself.
So treasure your wife.
Key number 3, walk in forgiveness. You know well, you're going to do a lot of things to upset each other. And you're probably going to do so on a somewhat frequent basis. We all have our own little idiosyncrasies. We all have our little personality hiccups. We all have our own shortcomings. We all kind of have this sandpaper gritty sort of thing that happens with us, especially when you're married. And you're married for a long time. Like even to this day, my wife notices that even though she made an intentional choice at one point to replace all the Rubbermaid containers in our drawer so that I could put them together and put them up in an organized fashion, and that the right Rubbermaid container would go in the right slot for the Rubbermaid. Even though she went ahead and replaced all of our Rubbermaid containers so that we would have a uniformity of Rubbermaid containers instead of just all these random spattering of Rubbermaid containers. Even with that, I still have a difficult time stacking Rubbermaid containers in the appropriate spot. I don't know why. Neither does she. My mom once suggested that maybe I didn't play with enough Lincoln Logs as a kid. I don't know. But at the end of the day, marriage is going to take the deliberate choice to forgive each other of the small things and even of the big things. Sometimes multiple times, even in a day. So be patient with one another. Practice forgiveness. Make it a choice to forgive even when you don't want to forgive. Do simple things like take hold of the thoughts in your brain and don't let them run wild with, they just irritate me, and sit there and mull over the thought over and over and over again. I've told them once, I've told them 1,000 times. Why do you do that? You just know it makes me crazy. Practice forgiveness on a regular basis so you don't get to that it just makes me crazy sort of happenings in life. Realize at the end of the day, we're all a work in progress, and it may take days, weeks, months, years, decades, I even say, to iron some issues out. So if you know that going in, practice forgiveness, and I think you'll realize how much you make things better at the end of the day simply by choosing as an act of your will to deliberately forgive your spouse. And while you're at it, maybe this is a bonus key. But if you're walking in forgiveness, don't insult one another, because if you're forgiving people, you're not insulting them. Don't talk about your spouse behind your back. Your spouse shouldn't find out what's wrong with them from your friends or your mother. Don't speak harshly to one another. Be gentle, be kind, and ultimately, look for an opportunity to speak in a praiseworthy manner to and about your spouse. Tell your spouse on a regular basis why they are awesome. And tell your friends, tell your family, tell coworkers and strangers why you think your spouse is awesome. Don't be one of those people who sit there and badmouth their spouse at work every opportunity they can. Instead, like I said, simply walk in forgiveness.
Have you the wind?
Here comes my Wesley now.
Man and wife. Say man and wife. Man and wife.
So everybody, this has been Jimmy Humphrey with jimmystable.com. Hope you've enjoyed our chat. It's been a short little podcast episode, bonus episode on 3 keys to a better marriage. If you've liked it, Take some time, share it with somebody. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast, either through jimmystable.com or however you're listening through this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, or whatever. I'd love to hear your feedback. Write to me on Facebook, write to me on Twitter, or just email me, jimmy@jimmystable.com. Take care, everybody, and God bless.
Do you see the light? What light? Have you seen the light? Yes! Yes! I have seen the light!
Air smudge. And now, a random moment from ADD Masterminds.
Okay, so I'm watching The Bachelorette. It's great. It's great people watching. That's the big thing.
Huh.
So
Can't do
you
it.
go there. So you're watching it, and
But
this
I'm
girl
not.
gets sick, and so the guy comes up to her, brings her a bottle of water, and says, "Hey, are you okay?" Then it cuts from there. She's like, "Yeah, I'm okay." And then she threw up or something like that. I don't know. Whatever. I wasn't really paying attention to it.
Find ADD Masterminds on Twitter, Facebook, and Anchor FM.